The academic debate phrase that highlights this evolving understanding is, historians continue to debate the precise chronological and conceptual transition from maleficium, the practice of harmful magic as a secular crime, to witchcraft, as a distinct diabolical heresy in the early medieval period, and the relative influence of popular belief versus theological development in this shift. Was it a gradual merging of ideas or a more abrupt redefinition? The lines are often blurry, even to modern scholars. Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights even further. Maybe pull your blanket just a little tighter, because we're diving headfirst into the chilling, often misunderstood, and undeniably brutal beliefs that fueled ancient witchcraft. Imagine, if you will, a world before science, before antibiotics, before even a basic understanding of why the sun rises or why the crops fail. You're standing under a sky so vast and dark, it feels like a heavy wool blanket draped over the world, punctuated by stars that seem close enough to touch. The wind whispers through the trees, and every rustle, every creak, every shadow feels like it holds a secret, a presence, a power you can't quite grasp. This isn't just a story, it's a journey back to a time when the line between the natural and the supernatural was blurred, when fear was a constant companion, and when a single misplaced word or a strange glance could seal your fate. Honestly, if you were born back then, you probably wouldn't survive the first week without accidentally offending a river spirit or tripping over a cursed root. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the centuries progressed, particularly from the 9th to the 12th centuries, the Church's stance on magic became more defined, though still somewhat inconsistent. While some theologians dismissed witchcraft as mere superstition, others began to emphasize the reality of demonic intervention and the possibility of human collaboration with evil. This internal debate within the Church reflects the broader societal struggle to understand and categorize these perceived threats. You find yourself standing at the dawn of human consciousness, a time when the world was a vast, untamed mystery. Every rustle in the bushes, every flash of lightning, every unexplained illness that swept through your small, vulnerable community was not merely an event, but a message. The wind wasn't just moving air, it was the breath of an unseen entity. The river wasn't just flowing water, it held a spirit, benevolent or malevolent, that dictated the success of your fishing or the safety of your crossing. This is the fertile ground from which the earliest seeds of magical belief sprouted, a desperate, primal attempt to make sense of a chaotic, often terrifying existence. You might hear tales of night-flying women, of secret gatherings under the moon, of strange rituals performed in hidden glades. These are the nascent whispers of the witch's sabbat, a concept that would later become central to the demonological theories of the High Middle Ages. In this early period, these are often just folk tales, scary stories told around the fire to keep children in line. But slowly, insidiously, these tales begin to be taken more seriously, infused with the growing theological understanding of a real, active devil. It's like when you tell a tall tale about a monster under your bed, and then your little sibling starts genuinely believing it and checking for fangs every night. Imagine a time when the concept of cause and effect was rudimentary. At best, your child falls ill with a fever, and you have no knowledge of bacteria or viruses. Your crops wither on the vine, and you don't understand soil depletion or drought cycles. In this vacuum of scientific understanding, the human mind, ever eager to find patterns and explanations, turned to the unseen. It was easier, perhaps even comforting in a strange way, to attribute these misfortunes to a displeased spirit, a jealous deity, or even a malevolent human agent wielding unseen powers, than to accept the brutal randomness of nature. This fundamental need to explain the inexplicable, to exert some form of control over the uncontrollable, is the bedrock upon which all magical systems, including those that would later be deemed witchcraft, were built. The early medieval period also saw the rise of monasticism and the increasing literacy of the clergy. This allowed for the codification and dissemination of theological ideas, including those concerning demons and their influence. Texts discussing the nature of evil, the temptations of Satan, and the dangers of idolatry became more widespread, further shaping the intellectual landscape in which beliefs about witchcraft would flourish. You're a member of a small nomadic tribe, perhaps 30,000 years ago. Life is a constant struggle for survival. One day, the strongest hunter, a man named Kale, suddenly collapses, racked with fever. You've seen this before. Others have perished. Panic ripples through the group. What caused this? Was it the wild boar he hunted yesterday? Or perhaps the strange, gnarled tree he passed by, rumored to be home to a grumpy forest sprite? Your tribal elder, an old woman with eyes that seem to hold the wisdom of generations, begins a ritual. She chants, she waves a smoking bundle of herbs, she draws symbols in the dirt. She's not a witch in the later, brutal sense, but a shaman, a bridge between your world and the spirit world. Her actions are an attempt to appease, to heal, to influence. This is the common historical fact. Shamanism and animistic beliefs, where spirits inhabit natural objects and phenomena, are among the oldest forms of human spirituality, predating organized religions by tens of thousands of years. These weren't considered evil then, they were simply how the world worked. You feel the slow tightening of the net. What was once a collection of disparate fears and local superstitions is gradually being woven into a more coherent, terrifying narrative. The isolated accusations, the rudimentary ordeals, the theological condemnations, they are all threads in a tapestry of dread that will eventually cover the entire continent. The medieval mind, grappling with a harsh reality and a burgeoning understanding of cosmic evil, found in the witch a convenient explanation for all that went wrong. But even in these early, seemingly benign systems, the potential for fear and accusation lurked. If the shaman's ritual failed, if Kale died despite her efforts, what then? Was it because the spirits were too powerful, or because someone else had interfered? Perhaps with a counterspell, a darker intention. This is where the seeds of suspicion began to germinate. If someone could heal, someone else could surely harm. If someone could bring rain, someone else could withhold it. The brutality of this period, while not yet reaching the inferno of the later witch hunts, lay in the foundational shift. It was here that the concept of the witch began to solidify, not just as a person who caused harm, but as an enemy of God, a pawn of the devil, and a threat to the very soul of Christendom. The paranoia was growing, like a slow-burning fire in the heart of Europe, waiting for the right conditions to ignite into a conflagration. You feel the chill of that nascent dread, knowing that the whispers of organized hunts are just beginning to echo through the forests and valleys. Promising a darker chapter ahead, consider the unique, little-known detail. Some archaeological evidence suggests that early cave paintings, particularly those depicting human-animal hybrids or figures adorned with antlers, may not just be artistic representations, but could be visual records of shamanic trances or rituals, indicating a deep and ancient connection between humanity and the spirit world. You gaze at a flickering fire, the shadows dancing on the cave walls, and you see the image of a half-human, half-stag figure. Is it a god, a spirit guide, or perhaps the very essence of the shaman, transformed in their spiritual journey? The lines are blurry, the meanings layered. You felt the growing paranoia of the early medieval period, the slow tightening of the net. Now imagine a single chilling document, a book emerging from the shadows of the late 15th century, that would not only codify every fear, every suspicion, and every brutal belief about witchcraft, but would also provide a terrifyingly precise blueprint for its persecution. This is the story of the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Witch's Hammer, a text that would become an instrument of unimaginable suffering, hammering down upon the accused with relentless theological and legal force. As communities grew larger and more complex, so too did their spiritual frameworks. You move from small, egalitarian bands to more settled agricultural societies. Now, the stakes are higher. A failed harvest doesn't just mean hunger, it means starvation for many. A sudden plague isn't just a few deaths, it can decimate an entire village. The need for control, for explanation, intensifies. And with it, the fear of those who might disrupt that control. You are living in a world on the cusp of profound change. The printing press has recently been invented, a revolutionary technology that allows ideas, even terrifying ones, to spread with unprecedented speed. The Church, still reeling from internal schisms and facing the nascent stirrings of the Reformation, is increasingly anxious about heresy and spiritual purity. In this climate of religious fervor and technological advancement, two Dominican inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, published their magnum opus in 1486. They claim it's a necessary guide, a definitive answer to the growing problem of witchcraft. You pick up a copy, its pages filled with dense Latin, and a shiver runs down your spine as you begin to read. You start to see individuals who specialize in these spiritual matters. Some are healers, revered for their knowledge of herbs and their ability to communicate with the unseen. Others are diviners, who can read omens in the flight of birds or the entrails of sacrificed animals. But then there are those who are whispered about, those who seem to hold a different kind of power. Perhaps they are reclusive, or their appearance is unusual, or they have a knack for being present when misfortune strikes. These are the proto-witches, not yet condemned by grand religious doctrines, but already viewed with a mixture of awe and unease. The Malleus Maleficarum isn't just a book, it's a weapon. It systematically argues for the reality of witches, their pacts with the devil, and their ability to cause real, tangible harm. It dismisses any skepticism as heresy itself, effectively creating a closed loop of belief where doubt is impossible. If you question the existence of witches, you are, by extension, questioning God's power and the devil's malevolence. This is a crucial shift. Witchcraft is no longer just a crime or a sin. It is the ultimate heresy, a direct challenge to the divine order. It's like when you're trying to argue with someone online, and they just say, "If you don't agree with me, you're wrong." End of discussion. Right. Except here, the consequences are a bit more severe than a heated comment section. It's a hot summer, and the well has run dry. The village chief, a stern man named Thuron, has consulted the rainmaker, who performed elaborate rituals, but still, no rain. Desperation hangs heavy in the air, thick as the dust on the parched fields. Then, someone remembers Alara, the old woman who lives on the edge of the forest. She's always been a bit odd, collecting strange plants, muttering to herself. Last week, she had an argument with Thuron's son, and now the well is dry. Coincidence? Or something more sinister? You feel a knot of fear tighten in your stomach. It's easy to blame the unknown, isn't it? Especially when it's embodied by someone who stands apart. The book is divided into 3 parts. The first part argues that witchcraft is real and that witches truly exist. It refutes common arguments against the reality of magic, emphasizing the devil's power and his ability to work through human agents. The second part details the methods by which witches operate, from causing impotence and infertility to raising storms and inflicting disease. It describes how they make pacts with the devil, attend sabbats, and engage in perverse sexual acts with demons. You read these descriptions, your mind reeling at the vivid, disturbing imagery, and you can feel the fear it would instill in a populace already predisposed to believe. This is where the concept of maleficium begins to take root. The idea that magic can be used to cause harm. It's not just about appeasing spirits for good fortune anymore. It's about actively manipulating forces to bring about misfortune, illness, or death. And if someone can do that, then they must be stopped. You start to see rudimentary forms of protective magic emerge. Charms worn to ward off evil eyes, rituals performed to cleanse homes of unseen malevolence. It's a magical arms race, really, between those who seek to protect and those who are perceived to harm. It's like when you try to block those annoying pop-up ads, and the ad companies just find new ways to get around your blockers. A never-ending battle, but with much higher stakes. A common historical fact that underscores the impact of this text is the Malleus Maleficarum became one of the most influential and widely reprinted books during the early modern period. Second only to the Bible in terms of sales and distribution, serving as the definitive manual for identifying, prosecuting, and executing witches for centuries. Its widespread availability, thanks to the printing press, meant that its brutal doctrines permeated legal and theological thought across Europe. You can imagine copies of this book, heavy and ominous, sitting on the desks of judges, inquisitors, and local magistrates, guiding their every decision. The academic debate phrase that comes to mind here is Historians still debate whether the earliest accusations of harmful magic were primarily rooted in genuine fear of supernatural malevolence, or were more often a socio-political tool to control marginalized individuals or enforce communal conformity. Was it truly about the magic, or about the person wielding it? Or rather, the perception of them wielding it? This question echoes through millennia, a constant shadow behind the brutal beliefs. The third part of the Malleus is perhaps the most chilling. It outlines the precise legal procedures for prosecuting witches. It details how to conduct interrogations, how to interpret evidence or lack thereof, and how to extract confessions. It advocates for the use of torture, arguing that it is necessary to uncover the truth, even if the accused maintains their innocence. It even provides guidance on how to deal with the devil's marks and other physical signs of witchcraft. This is where the theoretical demonology translates directly into brutal practice. As societies became more structured, so did their understanding of the divine. Polytheistic pantheons emerged, with gods and goddesses representing various aspects of nature and human life. These deities often had their own priests and priestesses, their own temples and rituals. This created a more formalized spiritual hierarchy. Where did the independent practitioners of magic fit into this new order? Often, they didn't. Their power was individual, not sanctioned by the state or the established religious institutions. This made them suspect. You are a local magistrate, perhaps in a small German town. A woman has been accused of bewitching a neighbor's child. You open your copy of the Malleus. It tells you that women are more susceptible to the devil's temptations due to their carnal lust and weak intellect. It instructs you on how to examine her for devil's marks, insensitive spots on the body that supposedly indicate a pact. It advises you on how to break her will during interrogation, even suggesting specific forms of torture if she refuses to confess. The book gives you permission, even encouragement, to be brutal, all in the name of piety and justice. Think of the ancient Egyptians, with their elaborate magical papyri and their belief in protective amulets and spells for the afterlife. Magic was an integral part of their daily lives, woven into their religion and medicine. Yet, even in this magic-rich culture, there were distinctions. A priest performing a ritual in a temple was acting within the accepted framework. A common person, however, attempting to curse an enemy or influence a lover through illicit means might be seen as dabbling in dangerous, unauthorized territory. It's like the difference between a licensed doctor prescribing medicine and your eccentric aunt trying to cure your cold with a concoction of garlic and spiderwebs. One is sanctioned, the other, less so. A unique, little-known detail about the Malleus Maleficarum is, despite its immense influence, the Malleus was never officially endorsed by the Catholic Church as a whole. Kramer and Sprenger claimed papal approval in their introduction, but this was based on a misinterpretation or even a fabrication of a papal bull, and many contemporary theologians and jurists actually criticized its excesses and flawed legal arguments. You might think such a foundational text would have universal church backing, but it was largely the product of two zealots, whose work gained traction through its sheer audacity and the prevailing anxieties of the time. It's like that one really popular but totally unofficial fan theory for your favorite TV show that everyone believes, even though the creators never confirmed it, except, with much more dire consequences. The fear of the unknown, combined with the human tendency to seek explanations and assign blame, laid the groundwork for the brutal beliefs that would later define ancient witchcraft. It wasn't always about pointy hats and cauldrons. It was about the primal terror of forces beyond comprehension, and the desperate need to identify and neutralize those perceived to wield such forces against the community. You feel the chill of that ancient fear, a cold hand reaching out from the past, reminding you that even in our modern, scientific world, the shadows of the unexplained still linger, just waiting for a new name. The academic debate phrase that perfectly captures this contested authority is, historians continue to debate the extent to which the Malleus Maleficarum's influence stemmed from its theological authority versus its practical utility as a procedural manual for overwhelmed local courts and inquisitors grappling with a perceived surge in witchcraft accusations. Was it truly respected as a theological masterpiece? Or was it simply a convenient, step-by-step guide for those who needed a framework, however flawed, to deal with a terrifying phenomenon? The very air you breathe in these ancient times is thick with unseen forces. Every tree has a dryad, every stream a nymph, every rock a spirit. You learn from childhood to respect these entities, to offer small sacrifices, to perform simple gestures of appeasement. It's a practical spirituality, born of necessity. If you want to cross the river safely, you offer a pebble to its spirit. If you want a good harvest, you leave a portion of your first fruits for the earth goddess. This is not witchcraft as we might later understand it. It's simply living in harmony with a world teeming with consciousness. The Malleus essentially created a self-fulfilling prophecy. By providing a detailed framework for identifying witches, it encouraged people to see witchcraft everywhere. By legitimizing torture, it ensured that confessions, however coerced, would be obtained. And by defining witchcraft as the ultimate heresy, it justified the most extreme punishments. It's a terrifying feedback loop, where belief fuels accusation fuels torture, and torture fuels confession, all confirming the initial brutal belief. But what happens when harmony is broken? When the river floods? Despite your offerings? When the crops fail? Even after your prayers? That's when the questions turn accusatory. Someone must be upsetting the balance. Someone must be working against the natural order. And in a world where everything is imbued with spirit, the idea of a malevolent human manipulating these spirits for ill intent becomes terrifyingly plausible. You hear the chilling logic of the Malleus echo in the courtroom? If a witch is accused and she denies it, she is lying because the devil compels her to lie. If she confesses, she is obviously guilty. If she cries, she is feigning remorse. If she doesn't cry, she is hardened by evil. There is no escape, no path to innocence once the accusation has been made and the Malleus is consulted. It's like playing a game where every single choice leads to game over. No matter what you do, you lose. You witness a heated argument in the village square. Two farmers, their faces red with anger, are shouting about a boundary dispute. Days later, one of the farmer's prize oxen falls ill and dies. The other farmer, known for his quick temper and his strange, carved amulets, is immediately suspected. He didn't just argue, he cursed. The belief isn't that he physically harmed the ox, but that he invoked some unseen power, some malevolent spirit, to bring about its demise. This is the insidious creep of suspicion, turning everyday misfortune into evidence of dark magic. The book's misogynistic tone is also striking. It explicitly states that women are more prone to witchcraft than men, citing their fragility, lust, and weakness of intellect. This deeply ingrained prejudice, combined with the book's legal authority, meant that the vast majority of those accused and executed as witches were women. You feel the weight of this historical injustice, knowing that countless innocent women were condemned based on such hateful and unfounded assumptions. It's truly a brutal testament to how easily fear and prejudice can be weaponized against an entire gender. The earliest forms of witchcraft were often indistinguishable from general folk magic or traditional healing practices. The village wise woman who brewed herbal remedies was also the one who might offer a charm to ward off bad luck. The line between beneficial and harmful magic was fluid, often depending on the observer's perspective and the outcome of the magic. If her remedy worked, she was a healer. If it failed, and the patient died, she might be seen as having caused the death, or at least failed to prevent it due to some darker influence. It's like when you try to fix your computer by turning it off and on again. If it works, you're a genius. If it doesn't, well, you just made things worse, didn't you? The Malleus Maleficarum didn't invent the fear of witches, but it systematized it, codified it, and gave it a terrifying legitimacy. It turned vague anxieties into concrete procedures, and local superstitions into a grand, diabolical conspiracy. It provided the intellectual and legal justification for the horrific witch hunts that would sweep across Europe in the centuries that followed, leading to the deaths of tens of thousands of innocent people. The true brutality of these beliefs stems from the absolute conviction that such malevolent magic was real, and that its practitioners were a direct threat to the community's survival. In a world where life was already precarious, anything that added to that precarity, anything that introduced an element of unpredictable, unseen malice, was met with extreme fear and eventually extreme measures. You feel the collective anxiety of the group, a palpable tension that hums beneath the surface of daily life. Every cough, every stumble, every bad dream could be a sign, a portent, a curse. You close the heavy book, the words still echoing in your mind. The hammer was not just a metaphor, it was a literal instrument of destruction, wielded by fearful authorities against a terrified populace. Its pages, filled with theological justifications for torture and execution, represent one of the darkest chapters in human history, a chilling reminder of what happens when fear, ignorance, and absolute belief combine to create a system of brutal persecution. You feel the cold weight of its legacy, a testament to the power of a single text to unleash unimaginable cruelty. This foundational fear, this deep-seated belief in the active, often hostile, presence of the supernatural, is the fertile soil from which the later, more organized, and truly brutal witch hunts would spring. It wasn't a sudden invention. It was an evolution of fear, a hardening of suspicion, as societies grappled with their vulnerability in a world they barely understood. And as you drift deeper into this ancient landscape, you begin to understand that the whispers of ancient shadows were not just stories around a campfire. They were the very fabric of existence, shaping beliefs, dictating actions, and ultimately leading to unimaginable suffering. You've seen the terrifying power of the Malleus Maleficarum, how it codified fear and provided a blueprint for persecution. Now, we must confront the most chilling aspect of these brutal beliefs, the systematic art of forced confession. Imagine yourself in a dark, cold chamber, stripped of dignity, your mind and body subjected to a relentless psychological and physical assault, all designed to extract a single, desired outcome and admission of guilt. No matter how innocent you truly are, you felt the primal fear, the ancient whispers that laid the groundwork for suspicion. Now, let's journey forward, as those innocent folk beliefs begin their insidious transformation, twisting from comforting rituals into the feared and forbidden arts we recognize as dark magic. This isn't a sudden, dramatic shift, but a slow, creeping process, like the shadows lengthening at dusk, until what was once familiar becomes unsettling, then terrifying. The legal system of the time, particularly the inquisitorial system that gained prominence in the late Middle Ages and early modern period, operated on a principle vastly different from modern justice. In many places, a confession was considered the queen of proofs, the most undeniable form of evidence. Without it, a conviction for a crime as serious as witchcraft, which often lacked tangible evidence, was difficult. This created an immense pressure to obtain a confession, and this pressure, combined with the absolute belief in the witch's guilt, led directly to the widespread use of torture. As communities grew, so did the complexity of their social structures and, inevitably, their spiritual systems. You're no longer just a member of a small nomadic band. You're part of a burgeoning village, perhaps even an early town, with more people, more interactions, and more resources to protect. The stakes of misfortune rise exponentially. If a single hunter falls ill, it's a tragedy. If the entire harvest fails, it's a catastrophe that can wipe out hundreds. This heightened vulnerability fuels a desperate need for order, for control, and for clear distinctions between what is good and what is bad, what is permitted and what is forbidden. You are brought before a panel of stern-faced men, a judge, perhaps a local lord, and an inquisitor, their eyes hard, their voices devoid of warmth. You are accused of witchcraft. Perhaps your neighbor's cow died, or a child fell ill, or a storm ruined the harvest. The accusation itself, fueled by fear and the doctrines of the Malleus, is often enough to condemn you in their minds. They begin with questions, seemingly gentle at first, but with an underlying menace. They ask about your life, your habits, your acquaintances. They weave a narrative of suspicion, twisting innocent actions into sinister omens. You deny everything vehemently, desperately. But your denials are met with knowing glances, with the pronouncement that the devil makes his servants lie. In this evolving landscape, the informal, fluid practices of early shamanism and animism start to bump up against emerging, more formalized religious structures. Think of the rise of organized priesthoods, dedicated temples, and codified rituals. These institutions often served not just spiritual needs, but also social and political ones. They provided explanations for the universe, offered solace, and reinforced communal values. Their power, however, often depended on being the sole arbiters of divine will and magical efficacy. The Malleus Maleficarum and other contemporary legal texts provided detailed instructions on how to conduct these interrogations. They advised starting with psychological pressure, sleep deprivation, isolation, constant questioning. They suggested bringing in witnesses who might be coerced or genuinely frightened into making accusations. They emphasized the importance of ensuring the accused was alone, without sympathetic family or friends, to break their spirit. You feel the crushing weight of isolation, the endless hours of questioning, your own voice becoming hoarse, your denials sounding weaker even to your own ears. So, what happens to the independent practitioners, the village-wise women, the solitary hermits who still commune with spirits in the old ways? Outside the new temple walls, they become problematic. Their power is decentralized, unpredictable, and therefore threatening to the established order. Their knowledge of herbs, their ability to interpret omens, their direct connection to the unseen world, once seen as natural and beneficial, now begins to be viewed with suspicion. It's like when your favorite indie band suddenly gets huge, and then the record labels try to sign them and make them sound like everyone else. If they refuse, they're difficult. If they conform, they lose their edge. In this case, the edge was their very existence. A common historical fact about this period is torture became a standard legal procedure in witchcraft trials across Europe during the early modern period, justified by the belief that witches, being in league with the devil, would not confess voluntarily and required extreme measures to reveal their hidden crimes. This wasn't just random cruelty, it was a systematic application of pain, designed to break the will and force a confession. You can almost hear the creak of the rack, the snap of bones, the desperate cries that filled those chambers, knowing that each sound was a testament to the brutal logic of the time. The concept of dark magic or forbidden arts isn't an inherent quality of the magic itself, but rather a designation imposed by those in power. It's a label, a categorization that serves to control and condemn. If a priest performs a ritual to bring rain, it's divine intervention. If a solitary woman in the woods performs a similar ritual, and rain falls, it might be seen as dangerous manipulation, perhaps even in league with malevolent forces. The intent might be the same, but the source and the social standing of the practitioner make all the difference. If psychological pressure failed, the physical torment began. The methods were varied and horrific, designed to inflict maximum pain without immediately causing death, allowing for prolonged suffering and repeated sessions. You might be subjected to the strappado, where your hands are tied behind your back and you are hoisted into the air by a rope, often with weights attached to your feet, dislocating your shoulders. Or perhaps the thumb screws, slowly crushing your fingers. Or the boot, a device that compressed your leg, shattering bones. The goal was always the same: to make the pain so unbearable that a confession, any confession, became the only escape. This is where the idea of witchcraft as something inherently evil, something fundamentally opposed to the established good, truly begins to solidify. It's no longer just about causing harm maleficium. It's about how that harm is caused, and who is causing it. The old gods, the nature spirits, the ancestral entities, they don't disappear overnight. Instead, they often become demonized, twisted into malevolent entities in the narratives of the new, dominant religions. The forest sprite you once appeased with a pebble might now be seen as a minor demon, and the person who still seeks its favor is therefore seen as an agent of evil. You are on the rack, your limbs stretched beyond their natural limits, every muscle screaming in protest. The Inquisitor leans in, his face grim, his voice a low monotone. Confess your pact with the devil. Confess your attendance at the Sabbat. Confess the names of your accomplices. Each denial is met with another turn of the screw, another agonizing stretch. Your mind races, desperately trying to invent a story. Any story that will make the pain stop. You are no longer concerned with truth, only with survival? It's like when you're trying to untangle a really stubborn knot, and you just keep pulling and pulling, even though you know you're probably just making it worse. But you can't stop because the pressure is too intense. A common historical fact that illustrates this shift is, in many ancient cultures, particularly with the rise of organized state religions. The practice of magic became increasingly regulated and often criminalized, especially if it was perceived to challenge political or religious authority. You see this in early legal codes, where specific punishments are laid out for those who practice harmful magic. It's no longer just a social taboo. It's a crime against the state or against the gods themselves. A unique, little-known detail about forced confessions is many confessions, extracted under torture, contained remarkably similar details about the witch's sabbat, pacts with the devil, and specific acts of maleficium, leading some historians to suggest that inquisitors inadvertently taught the accused what to confess through leading questions and repeated descriptions of demonological theory. You can imagine the scene: did you fly to the sabbat? No, turn of the screw. Did you meet the devil there? No, another turn. Did he appear as a black goat? After enough pain, the accused might finally gasp. Yes, a black goat. The details, once unknown, became part of the truth through brutal coercion. It's a chilling example of how belief can create its own evidence. Imagine you're in ancient Mesopotamia, where powerful priests interpret the will of the gods from the movements of the stars and the entrails of sacrificed animals. Their magic is part of the state, used for divination, healing, and protection of the king. But then there's a whisper about a woman, living in the poorer quarter, who can allegedly cause a rival merchant's goods to spoil with just a muttered incantation. Her magic isn't sanctioned. It's personal, uncontrolled, and therefore dangerous. The fear isn't just that she can do harm, but that she operates outside the system, a rogue element in a society that craves order. The academic debate phrase that highlights this insidious process is, historians continue to debate the extent to which the detailed narratives of witchcraft, including the sabbat and demonic pacts, were genuine popular beliefs versus constructs imposed upon the accused through leading questions and the coercive environment of torture. Were these confessions truly revealing hidden truths, or were they simply reflections of the inquisitor's own demonological fantasies, forced onto the accused? The earliest legal texts, like the Code of Hammurabi from Babylon around 1754 BC, contain provisions against witchcraft. You read a tablet, carved with cuneiform script, and decipher a chilling passage: if a man has put a spell upon another man, and has not justified himself, he who is charged with the spell shall go to the holy river, he shall plunge into the holy river, and if the holy river overcome him, he who charged him shall take possession of his house. If the holy river prove that man to be innocent, and save him, he who charged him with the spell shall be put to death. This isn't just about belief, it's about the law, backed by the terrifying ordeal of the river, a precursor to later witch trials. The stakes, as you can clearly see, have become lethally high. Even after a confession was obtained, the ordeal was far from over. The confession, often given under duress, had to be ratified later, supposedly without torture, but the threat of renewed torture, the fear of further suffering, hung heavy in the air. The accused, physically broken and mentally shattered, rarely recanted. To recant was to invite more torture, and ultimately a more certain death. The system was designed to be inescapable. This transition from folklore to forbidden arts wasn't always smooth or complete. Many of the old practices persisted, especially in rural areas, often existing alongside the new dominant religions. You might still find people secretly performing ancient fertility rites in the fields, even as they attend ceremonies at the grand new temple. This created a tension, a duality where the same actions could be viewed as either harmless superstition or dangerous heresy, depending on who was watching and what their agenda was. It's like when your grandma still uses a flip phone, and you're trying to explain TikTok to her. Two different worlds, coexisting, but one is definitely seen as more modern and correct than the other. You are presented with a written document, your confession, filled with grotesque details you barely remember uttering. You are asked to sign it, to affirm its truth. Your hand trembles, your body aches, but you sign. What choice do you have? You know that even if you somehow survive this, your life is over, your reputation is ruined, your family shamed, and your fate sealed. The confession, once the key to stopping the pain, has become the final nail in your coffin. A unique, little-known detail from this period is, in ancient Egypt, While magic was widely practiced and even integrated into royal and religious rituals, there was a clear distinction between Heka divine magic, often beneficial and associated with the gods, and black magic sorcery intended to harm, often associated with curses or necromancy, and punishable by law. You might see a priest inscribing protective hieroglyphs on a tomb, using Heka to ensure a safe passage to the afterlife. But then you hear whispers of a rival, using forbidden spells to bind a spirit or cause an enemy to sicken. The tools might be similar: spells, amulets, incantations, but the perceived intent and the social sanction made all the difference. The same powerful words could be a blessing or a curse, depending on whose lips they came from. The methods of forced confession also included psychological manipulation beyond torture. Accused individuals might be shown instruments of torture before their interrogation to instill fear. They might be told that their accomplices had already confessed and implicated them. They might be promised leniency for a confession, only to find that the promise was hollow. The entire process was a masterclass in psychological warfare, designed to break down a person's will and sense of self. It's like when you're trying to resist eating that last piece of cake, and someone just keeps putting it closer and closer, whispering about how delicious it is until you finally give in. Except, with much more severe consequences than a sugar rush. The academic debate phrase that perfectly captures this evolving dynamic is, scholars continue to debate the extent to which the criminalization of magic in ancient societies was a genuine response to perceived supernatural threats versus a mechanism for social control, particularly over women and marginalized groups who often served as traditional healers or spiritual guides. Was it about protecting society from real magical harm, or about consolidating power and suppressing dissent? The answer, as is often the case with history, is likely a complex blend of both. The brutality of the art of forced confession lay in its systematic dehumanization. The accused was not seen as an innocent until proven guilty, but as a vessel for evil, whose lies needed to be beaten out of them. The pain inflicted was not just punishment, it was a tool to uncover a truth that was already predetermined by the accuser's beliefs. This process turned justice into a cruel farce, where the innocent were compelled to condemn themselves, and the very act of denial became proof of guilt. As monotheistic religions began to rise and spread, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the demonization of older polytheistic or animistic practices intensified dramatically. In these new religious frameworks, there was often one true God, and any other spiritual entities were either false idols or, more terrifyingly, agents of an opposing evil force. This left no room for the nuanced, fluid spiritual landscape of earlier times. The old gods became demons, their followers became devil worshippers, and their magic became the work of pure evil. You feel the lingering chill of those dark chambers, the echoes of desperate pleas and the relentless grind of the torturer's wheel. The forced confession, born from a brutal belief in the reality of witchcraft and the necessity of its eradication, stands as a stark monument to human cruelty and the terrifying consequences of unchecked fear and absolute conviction. It is a reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters are not supernatural entities, but the very systems we create in their name. You witness the fervent sermons of a new preacher, his voice booming through the marketplace. He speaks of a single, all-powerful God and condemns the old ways, the pagan rituals, the charms, and the whispered incantations. He points to the old woman who still collects herbs in the forest, her hands gnarled with age, and declares her to be an agent of the adversary. The fear you once felt for unexplained misfortune now has a clear target, a defined enemy. It's no longer just bad luck, it's a deliberate act of evil, orchestrated by human agents in league with demonic forces. You've felt the chilling grip of forced confessions, the relentless machinery designed to extract a predetermined truth. Now, let's step out of those dark interrogation chambers and into the very heart of the communities themselves, where the brutal beliefs you've explored ignited a terrifying phenomenon: mass hysteria. Imagine a small village, once bound by kinship and shared hardship, now consumed by an invisible enemy, turning neighbor against neighbor in a spiraling vortex of fear and accusation. This religious framework provided a powerful, coherent narrative for the existence of witches. They weren't just people who used magic, they were people who had actively chosen to align themselves with evil, to reject the true God, and to serve the devil. This belief system provided a theological justification for the brutal persecution that would follow. If someone was working for the devil, then any measures, no matter how extreme, were justified to eradicate that evil. It's like when you're playing a video game, and the enemy is clearly labeled boss-level evil incarnate. You don't feel bad about hitting them with everything you've got, do you? Because they're evil. In the late 16th and 17th centuries, the peak of the European witch hunts, the fear of witchcraft was not confined to the minds of inquisitors and theologians. It permeated every aspect of daily life, fueled by sermons, pamphlets, and the terrifying accounts of trials. When a confession, however coerced, was extracted, it often included the names of accomplices. This was the insidious mechanism that turned isolated accusations into widespread panics. Once one person confessed to meeting the devil and naming others, the floodgates of suspicion burst open. The concept of a covenant with the devil, where a witch willingly gave up their soul in exchange for magical power, became a central tenet of this new, brutal belief system. This wasn't just about someone using a spell, it was about a fundamental betrayal of God and humanity. This idea, more than any other, solidified the image of the witch as a truly malevolent, dangerous figure, deserving of the harshest punishments. You imagine the terror of being accused of such a pact, knowing that your very soul was considered forfeit, and your earthly existence doomed to a fiery end. You are living in a small, tight-knit community, perhaps in rural Germany or Scotland. Life is hard. The harvest has been poor. A mysterious illness has claimed several children, and the local lord has just imposed a new, heavy tax. Tensions are already high, like a taut string ready to snap. Then, a child begins to have fits, speaking in strange tongues, claiming to be tormented by unseen spirits. Or perhaps a cow, plump and healthy yesterday, is found dead in the pasture and its body strangely contorted. In a world without scientific understanding, these misfortunes are not random. They are deliberate acts of malice, and someone must be responsible. The transition from simple folk beliefs to forbidden arts was a journey from understanding the world through spirits to condemning those who interacted with spirits outside of approved channels. It was a shift from acknowledging the unknown to actively demonizing it. And as this transformation took hold, the stage was set for the truly brutal chapters of history, where fear, religion, and social control would intertwine to create a terrifying legacy. You feel the weight of this historical evolution, a chilling reminder of how easily fear can be weaponized, and how quickly the line between sacred and sinister can be blurred. The first accusation often came from a victim, or someone claiming to be a victim, of maleficium, harmful magic. Perhaps they experienced unexplained pains, sudden illness, or financial ruin. They would point a finger, often at someone already marginalized, an old woman living alone, a quarrelsome neighbor, someone with a physical deformity, or simply someone who didn't conform to societal norms. Once that finger was pointed, and the accusation gained traction, the community's collective anxiety began to fester. You've witnessed the slow, chilling transformation of folk beliefs into forbidden arts? Now, prepare to delve into the heart of the darkness, as we uncover the insidious shift where even the most benign, sacred beliefs were twisted and demonized, leading directly to the brutal interpretations that would define witchcraft for centuries. This isn't just about new religions condemning old ones. It's about a fundamental redefinition of good and evil, where what was once seen as divine or protective became, in the eyes of a new order, utterly sinister. A common historical fact that demonstrates this communal breakdown is the vast majority of witchcraft accusations during the peak of the hunts occurred in small, rural communities, rather than large cities, suggesting that close-knit social structures, coupled with local anxieties and superstitions, were fertile ground for mass hysteria. In a village where everyone knows everyone else, and where gossip travels faster than a galloping horse, suspicion can spread like wildfire. It's like when you're in a small town, and everyone knows what you had for breakfast before you even finish eating it. Now imagine that level of scrutiny. But with your life on the line, imagine, if you will, the sacred groves of old Europe. You walk beneath ancient, towering trees. Their branches interlace like the fingers of sleeping giants. Sunlight dapples through the leaves. illuminating moss-covered stones and the faint outlines of altars where, for generations, your ancestors offered prayers and small gifts to the spirits of the forest, to the gods of fertility, to the very earth beneath your feet. These were places of peace, of reverence, where the divine was felt in the rustle of leaves and the murmur of streams. The rituals performed here were meant to ensure good harvests, healthy children, and the well-being of the community. They were, in essence, acts of love and respect for the natural world and the unseen forces that governed it. Once an accusation was made, the accused was often subjected to public scrutiny. Their past actions, their words, even their dreams, were re-examined through the lens of suspicion. Did they ever curse someone in an argument? Did they have an unusual birthmark? Did they seem too happy when misfortune struck a neighbor? Every innocent detail could be twisted into evidence of their diabolical pact. You feel the chilling weight of every eye on you, every whisper turning into a roar, every memory becoming a potential weapon. But then a new ideology arrives, carried by zealous missionaries or conquering armies. This new belief system, often monotheistic, asserts a singular, all-powerful God and declares all other deities, all other spirits, to be false, or worse, demonic. The very concept of multiple gods, of nature spirits, of ancestral veneration, is not just dismissed as error, but actively condemned as idolatry, as a pact with the adversary. The sacred grove, once a sanctuary, becomes a place of pagan darkness, haunted by malevolent entities. The gentle spirits you once honored are now recast as devils, tempting souls away from the true path. The role of children in these accusations is a particularly disturbing aspect of the hysteria. In places like Salem, children and young adults often initiated accusations, claiming to be afflicted by witches, experiencing strange fits, or seeing spectral figures. Their testimonies, often vivid and dramatic, were taken seriously, even by educated magistrates. This phenomenon amplified the panic, as the most vulnerable members of society seemed to be under attack, and only the accused witches could be responsible. It's like when a kid tells a really wild story, and everyone believes them because, well, they're a kid, and kids don't lie. Right? Except these stories had deadly consequences. This demonization wasn't just a theological argument, it was a powerful tool for conversion and control. By painting the old ways as inherently evil, the new religion could justify their suppression, their destruction, and the persecution of those who clung to them. You see the ancient oak, once revered, now being felled by axes, its sacred stones toppled and defiled. The symbols of the old gods are smashed, replaced by crosses or crescents. It's a cultural war, fought on the battleground of belief, and the casualties are not just physical structures, but entire spiritual worldviews. A unique, little-known detail about this communal hysteria is, in some localized outbreaks, particularly in Scotland and parts of Germany, accusations could spread through entire families or social networks, with individuals confessing under torture and then implicating parents, siblings, spouses, and even children, creating a cascading effect of accusations. You can imagine the horror your sister confesses under duress. And suddenly, she names you. Then you, broken by torture, name your mother. The bonds of family, once a source of strength, become a conduit for destruction, tearing apart the very fabric of the community from within. A common historical fact that vividly illustrates this shift is the Christianization of Europe often involved the deliberate demonization of pre-Christian pagan deities and practices, transforming revered gods and goddesses into devils and their rituals into acts of witchcraft. Think of figures like the horned god of pagan traditions, often associated with nature and fertility. In the new Christian narrative, this figure was easily conflated with the image of Satan, complete with horns and cloven hooves. The benevolent protector of the wild became the ultimate embodiment of evil. It's like taking a beloved cartoon character and suddenly making them the villain in a horror movie. Same face, but a completely different, terrifying role. The academic debate phrase that encapsulates this social dynamic is, historians continue to debate the primary drivers of localized witch panics, whether they were primarily fueled by genuine popular belief in witchcraft, socioeconomic anxieties, interpersonal conflicts, or the active encouragement of legal and religious authorities. Was it truly about the magic, or about the underlying tensions and fears that found an outlet in these accusations? The answer, as is often the case, is probably all of the above tangled together in a horrifying knot. This transformation wasn't limited to deities. Sacred animals, once symbols of divine power or wisdom, were also demonized. The serpent, revered in many ancient cultures as a symbol of rebirth or wisdom, became the embodiment of temptation and evil in the Abrahamic traditions. Owls, once seen as wise or prophetic, became creatures of ill omen, associated with darkness and witchcraft. Even certain plants and herbs, once used for healing or divination, were now viewed with suspicion, their powers attributed not to nature, but to diabolical influence. The trials themselves, often conducted by local magistrates or special commissions, became public spectacles. The accused, often physically and emotionally broken by interrogation and torture, would confess to fantastical acts flying through the air, attending sabbats, having sexual relations with the devil, suckling imps, and causing various misfortunes. These confessions, however absurd, confirmed the brutal beliefs of the accusers and further fueled the hysteria. Each confession, each execution, seemed to validate the existence of a grand, diabolical conspiracy, making the community even more vigilant and fearful. You watch as a village elder, a woman who has healed generations with her knowledge of herbs, is suddenly regarded with suspicion. Her remedies, once sought after, are now whispered about. Is she truly harnessing the power of nature? Or is she drawing on something darker, something forbidden? Her very effectiveness becomes a cause for alarm. If her poultice cures a fever, perhaps it's not the herbs, but an unholy pact that grants her power. This is the brutal logic of demonization. Any unexplained power, even if it appears beneficial, must come from an evil source if it does not align with the sanctioned divine. You stand in the crowded courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. The accused, a frail old woman named Illyra, is brought in. Her eyes are hollow, her body trembling. She begins to speak, her voice barely a whisper, recounting tales of riding broomsticks, of dancing with the devil in the forest, of making a pact with a black cat. The crowd gasps. Murmurs of horror ripple through the room. You know, deep down, that this isn't the Illyra you knew, the one who used to gather herbs and tell stories. But the words are coming from her mouth, and the fear in the room is contagious, overwhelming your doubts. Consider the unique, little-known detail. In some early Christian texts, the Roman goddess Diana, often associated with the moon, hunting, and wild places, was explicitly identified as a demon queen, leading nocturnal rides of witches. This reinterpretation served to delegitimize existing folk beliefs and integrate them into a narrative of demonic conspiracy. You can almost hear the hushed whispers in the night. Tales of Diana and her spectral hunt. No longer a majestic goddess, but a terrifying figure leading her unholy followers through the darkness. It's a powerful psychological weapon, turning a source of comfort into a source of terror. The role of fear itself cannot be overstated. Fear of the unknown, fear of misfortune, fear of divine punishment, and perhaps most powerfully, fear of being accused yourself. In a community gripped by hysteria, silence could be interpreted as complicity, and defending an accused witch could lead to your own accusation. This created a terrifying environment where self-preservation often trumped compassion or reason. It's like when everyone starts running from something, and you don't even know what it is, but you run too, just in case. The very concept of the witch as a malevolent agent, working in league with the devil, was largely a construct of this period of intense demonization. Before this, magic users might be seen as good or bad, powerful or weak, but they weren't necessarily considered to be in league with an ultimate evil force. The introduction of Satan as a cosmic adversary, actively seeking to corrupt humanity, provided the perfect framework for understanding why someone would choose to wield harmful magic. They weren't just causing mischief, they were actively participating in a grand, diabolical plan. The hysteria also fed on itself through the process of naming. Once a witch confessed, they were often pressured to name others who were also involved. This created a chain reaction, where one accusation led to another, and another, until entire families or even small towns could be implicated. The cycle was difficult to break. as each new name added to the perceived scale of the diabolical conspiracy. It's like a really terrible game of telephone, where the message gets more and more distorted and dangerous with each person it passes through. This theological shift also redefined the nature of sin. It wasn't just about individual transgressions, it was about cosmic rebellion. To practice witchcraft was not merely a crime against man, but a direct affront to God, a betrayal of the divine order. This elevated the perceived threat of witchcraft to an existential level, justifying extreme measures to combat it. If you were fighting for the very soul of humanity against the forces of evil, then no act was too harsh, no punishment too severe. It's like when you're playing a game, and the stakes suddenly go from lose a life to the entire universe will be destroyed. You tend to take things a bit more seriously then, don't you? The communal aspect of these panics meant that the lines between accuser, witness, and victim often blurred. People genuinely believed they were protecting their community, purging evil from their midst. The executions, far from being seen as acts of barbarity, were often viewed as necessary acts of purification, a way to restore order and appease an angry God. You watch as the condemned is led away, and you feel a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the individual, but relief that the perceived threat is being dealt with, that perhaps, now, your village will be safe. The academic debate phrase that resonates here is, historians continue to debate the precise point at which the concept of witchcraft transitioned from a collection of diverse folk magical practices into a coherent, demonologically driven heresy, and whether this transformation was primarily theological, social, or a combination of both. Was it a top-down imposition by religious authorities, or a bottom-up fear that found its articulation in new theological frameworks? The answer likely lies in the complex interplay of these forces. The hysteria in the hamlets was a brutal testament to the power of collective fear and the devastating consequences of unchecked belief. It turned ordinary people into accusers, neighbors into enemies, and communities into cauldrons of suspicion and terror. The spiral of accusations, fueled by the brutal beliefs about witchcraft and the systematic art of forced confession, left a trail of shattered lives and enduring trauma. A chilling reminder of how easily reason can be eclipsed by panic. The demonization extended to specific practices, charms, amulets, and incantations. Once common tools for protection or healing became suspect. If you wore a charm to ward off illness, where did its power come from? If it wasn't from God, then it must be from the devil. The act of blessing a field or a home, if done outside the sanctioned rituals of the church, could be seen as a curse in disguise. The very act of seeking power or influence outside the established religious hierarchy became an act of rebellion, a sign of allegiance to the forces of darkness. You've witnessed the terrifying crescendo of mass hysteria, the spiral of accusations that consumed entire communities. Now we arrive at the grim, inevitable conclusion of these brutal beliefs. The fires, the water, and the gallows. Imagine the final horrifying moments for those accused, as the full, unyielding force of fear, prejudice, and unwavering conviction crashes down upon them, sealing their fate in the most brutal ways imaginable. You remember the old woman, the one who used to tie red ribbons around the necks of sick children, murmuring ancient words? Now those ribbons are seen as instruments of evil, binding the child not to health, but to some unseen malevolence. Her murmurs are no longer comforting prayers, but sinister incantations. The fear is palpable, a tangible weight in the air, as suspicion replaces trust. It's a chilling reminder of how easily good intentions can be twisted into something terrifying when viewed through the lens of a new, unforgiving belief system. Once accused, and especially once a confession, however coerced, was obtained, the path to execution was often swift and merciless. You stand in the village square, the air thick with anticipation, a morbid excitement mingling with a palpable sense of dread. The trial, if you can even call it that, has been a foregone conclusion. The judge, armed with the Malleus Maleficarum and an unshakable belief in the devil's work, has pronounced the verdict guilty. The crowd murmurs, a mix of relief that the perceived evil is being purged, and a lingering, unsettling fear that it might not be truly gone. This systematic demonization created a climate of profound fear and paranoia. Every unexplained misfortune, every sudden death, every crop failure could now be attributed to the malevolent actions of a witch, empowered by the devil. This provided a convenient scapegoat for societal anxieties and misfortunes. If the plague swept through the village, it wasn't just disease, it was the work of witches poisoning the wells or casting spells. If a child was born with a deformity, it wasn't a genetic anomaly, it was the result of a witch's curse. This framework provided an explanation, however brutal, for the inexplicable, and a target for communal rage and fear. The punishments for witchcraft were designed not just to eliminate the individual, but to purify the community, to serve as a terrifying deterrent, and to make a stark example of those who dared to consort with evil. These were not quiet, private affairs. They were public spectacles, rituals of communal cleansing that reinforced the very beliefs they sought to eradicate. The accused, often emaciated, broken, and bewildered, became a symbol, a vessel onto which all the community's anxieties and misfortunes were projected. The shift from benign beliefs to brutal interpretations was a gradual but devastating process. It involved the systematic dismantling of old spiritual systems, the redefinition of deities as demons, and the reinterpretation of traditional practices as acts of heresy and diabolism. This created a powerful narrative that justified the persecution of those deemed to be witches, transforming them from mere practitioners of folk magic into agents of cosmic evil, deserving of the harshest possible punishments. You feel the cold grip of this historical shift, understanding how a change in belief could unleash such unimaginable cruelty. A common historical fact that highlights the varied brutality is, while burning at the stake is the most iconic image associated with witch executions, hanging was actually the most common method in England and its American colonies, whereas burning was more prevalent in continental Europe, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire and France. Due to witchcraft being classified as heresy, this distinction often depended on the legal and religious framework of the region. You might see the smoke rising from a pyre in Germany, or a body swinging from a gallows in England. Both equally horrifying, both equally final. It's like when you're watching a historical drama, and you think you know how it ends, but then you realize there were regional variations to the horror. You've seen how sacred beliefs were twisted into sinister ones. Now, let's travel to the classical world, to the sun-drenched lands of ancient Greece and the sprawling empire of Rome, where the fear of magic wasn't just a vague anxiety, but a codified threat, leading to specific, often brutal, punishments for those perceived to wield it. Here, curses weren't just whispered threats. They were meticulously crafted instruments of destruction, and the response to them was equally precise and unforgiving. Let's revisit the ordeals, those ancient, cruel tests of guilt that sometimes preceded a formal trial, or served as a trial in themselves. You are brought to the riverbank, your hands and feet bound, a rope tied around your waist. The cold water glints under the gray sky. The priest intones prayers invoking divine judgment. You are thrown in. If you sink, you are innocent, and they will pull you out, perhaps half drowned but alive. If you float, however, the pure water has rejected you, marking you as a witch, in league with the impure forces. The logic is chillingly simple, and for many, the outcome was a death sentence, whether by drowning or by subsequent execution. It's like a twisted game of sink or swim, where swimming means you're doomed. Imagine yourself walking through the bustling agora in Athens, or perhaps the Forum in Rome. The air is thick with the scent of spices, the murmur of countless voices, and the distant clang of metal on stone. You might see a philosopher debating, a merchant hawking wares, or a politician holding court. But beneath this veneer of order and intellectual discourse, there's a deep-seated belief in the efficacy of magic, both good and ill. While public religious rites were grand affairs, overseen by priests and priestesses, the private world was often riddled with anxieties about curses, love spells, and the malevolent gaze of the envious. Another ordeal, less common but equally brutal, was the pricking test. You are stripped naked, and an inquisitor or a designated pricker searches your body for the devil's mark, a spot believed to be insensitive to pain or bleeding, where the devil had touched or suckled his imp. They would use a needle or a sharp object, probing and pricking your skin. If they found such a spot, Or if you didn't cry out in pain, perhaps due to exhaustion, shock, or simply finding a numb spot, it was considered irrefutable proof of your guilt. You feel the cold steel against your skin, the sharp jabs, the desperate urge to cry out, knowing that silence could be your undoing. In ancient Greece, magic was a complex tapestry. There were figures like the magos, a Persian term for a priest or wise man, which eventually came to denote a sorcerer. There were also the guetes, often seen as charlatans or those who invoked spirits for nefarious purposes. The distinction was crucial. Acceptable magic, often called theurgia, was seen as divine and beneficial, aligning with the gods. Forbidden magic, goetia or pharmakia, was seen as impious, dangerous, and aimed at causing harm. This wasn't just a philosophical debate. It was a matter of life and death. Once condemned, the methods of execution were designed to be public and terrifying. Burning at the stake was particularly symbolic. Fire was seen as a purifying agent, capable of cleansing the land of the witch's evil and preventing their tainted soul from lingering. It was also a punishment reserved for heresy, emphasizing the religious nature of the crime. You are led to the pyre, the rough wood stacked high, the scent of kindling already in the air. The crowd watches, their faces a mixture of fear, righteousness, and grim fascination. The flames leap, consuming not just a body, but a life, a story, and a terrifying warning. You might stumble upon a small lead tablet, carefully rolled or folded, perhaps pierced with a nail. This is a defixio, or curse tablet. These weren't just angry scribbles, they were formal, often elaborate, appeals to underworld deities or chthonic spirits to inflict harm upon an enemy. You read the etched words, invoking powerful names, demanding that a rival charioteer break his leg, or a competitor in a lawsuit lose his voice, or a lover be tormented until they return. The language is precise, almost legalistic in its intent. It's like sending a very specific, very angry, and very supernatural cease and desist letter. Hanging, while perhaps less theatrical than burning, was equally brutal. The condemned would be led to the gallows, often after a public procession through the town, where they would be subjected to the jeers and curses of the crowd. The drop was often short, leading to a slow, agonizing strangulation rather than a quick neck break. You feel the rough rope around your neck, the sudden drop, the world spinning as your breath is slowly squeezed from your lungs. It's a terrifying, suffocating end, witnessed by all. A common historical fact about this period is ancient Greek and Roman societies widely practiced and feared curse tablets, defixiones, which were inscribed with petitions to deities or spirits to harm specific individuals, often buried in graves or wells to ensure their efficacy. These weren't just isolated incidents. Thousands of these tablets have been discovered across the Roman Empire and the Greek world, testifying to their widespread use and the deep-seated fear they inspired. You can almost feel the cold dread that would grip someone who suspected they were the target of such a curse. Knowing that unseen forces were being marshaled against them. A unique, little-known detail about the aftermath of these executions is, in some areas, or particularly after a burning, the ashes of the condemned witch were scattered or buried in unconsecrated ground, sometimes with a stake driven through them, to prevent their spirit from returning to haunt the living. This reflects the deep-seated fear that, even in death, the witch's malevolent power might persist. You can imagine the grim task, ensuring that every last trace of the accused was obliterated, leaving nothing behind but a lingering sense of dread and a chilling emptiness. The fear wasn't just of the curse itself, but of the person who cast it. Someone capable of invoking such powers was considered dangerous, a threat to the social fabric. While there wasn't a witch hunt in the medieval sense, there were certainly legal repercussions. In Rome, the 12 Tables, an early legal code from the 5th century BCE, contained provisions against incantations that moved crops from one field to another. Later laws, like the Lex Cornelia de Sicariis et Beneficiis law concerning assassins and poisoners from the 1st century BCE, explicitly targeted poisoners and those who used harmful magic. The line between poison and magic was often blurred, as both could cause unseen harm. It's like trying to figure out if your computer crashed because of a virus or because you spilled coffee on it. Either way, it's broken, and someone's getting blamed. The academic debate phrase that resonates with this finality is: historians continue to debate the effectiveness of public executions as a deterrent against witchcraft, with some arguing they reinforced belief and fear, while others suggest they ultimately contributed to a growing skepticism and revulsion that led to the decline of the hunts. Did these brutal spectacles truly stop witchcraft? Or did they merely solidify the terrifying narratives that fueled the hysteria, until the sheer scale of the horror became too much to bear? You hear whispers in the Roman marketplace about a woman named Canidia, mentioned in the poetry of Horace. She's depicted as a terrifying sorceress, capable of gruesome rituals, digging up graves, and using potent poisons and spells to inflict suffering. While she might be a literary caricature, her existence in popular imagination reflects a real cultural fear. She embodies the ultimate threat, someone who uses forbidden knowledge to manipulate the world for malevolent ends. The property of the condemned was often confiscated, leaving their families destitute and further marginalized. Children of accused witches might be ostracized, their lives forever tainted by the accusation against their parent. The ripple effects of these executions extended far beyond the individual, shattering families and leaving a legacy of trauma and shame for generations. It's like when a pebble drops into a still pond, and the ripples spread outwards, touching everything, long after the initial splash. A unique, little-known detail from this era is, despite the fear of harmful magic, many Roman homes contained protective amulets and charms, and even public officials might consult oracles or diviners for guidance, illustrating a complex interplay between sanctioned and unsanctioned magical practices. You might see a Roman general, before battle, sacrificing to the gods, while secretly wearing a small carved amulet beneath his armor, hoping to ward off the evil eye. The same society that condemned witches also relied on various forms of magic for protection and foresight. It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? Like someone who claims to hate reality TV but secretly binges it every weekend, the sheer scale of the executions is staggering. Tens of thousands of people, predominantly women, were executed as witches across Europe during the early modern period. Each death was a tragedy, a life brutally extinguished based on fear, superstition, and a deeply flawed system of justice. These were not isolated incidents, but a pervasive, systematic campaign of terror that swept across the continent, leaving an indelible mark on its history. The academic debate phrase that perfectly encapsulates this ambiguity is, scholars still debate the extent to which Roman and Greek legal prohibitions against magic were aimed at genuine supernatural threats versus being a means of controlling political dissent, social deviance, or the activities of marginalized groups. Were these laws truly about preventing magical harm, or were they about maintaining order and suppressing those who didn't conform? The answer, as always, is likely nuanced. You feel the collective sigh of relief from the crowd as the execution is complete. The perceived evil has been purged. For a moment, there is a sense of calm, a fragile hope that the misfortunes will cease, that the community will be safe once more. But beneath that relief, a deeper, more insidious fear often lingered, the fear that perhaps, just perhaps, not all the witches had been caught, or that the devil would simply find new agents. The brutal beliefs, once unleashed, were not easily contained, even by the most extreme measures. The Roman Empire, with its vast reach and diverse populations, encountered a multitude of magical traditions. As Christianity began to spread within the empire, the demonization of pagan practices intensified. Just as you saw in the previous chapter, Roman deities once revered were increasingly seen as demons by the burgeoning Christian faith. This further fueled the fear of magic, as it was now explicitly linked to the forces of evil. The fires, the water, and the gallows stand as stark monuments to the brutal beliefs behind ancient witchcraft. They represent the ultimate culmination of fear, the terrifying endpoint of a society consumed by paranoia and convinced of the reality of a diabolical conspiracy. The screams of the condemned, the crackle of the flames, the cold embrace of the water. These are the chilling echoes of a time when the very act of accusation could lead to an unimaginable, brutal end. You feel the finality of it all, a heavy silence settling over the scene, a quiet testament to the darkness that once held sway. You witness a public spectacle in a Roman amphitheater. A man accused of using magic to cause a plague is being led to his execution. The crowd roars, their fear and anger palpable. They believe his death will cleanse the city, appease the gods or God, depending on the era, and restore order. The punishment is brutal, designed not just to eliminate the individual, but to serve as a terrifying deterrent. It's a stark reminder that in these ancient societies, the belief in harmful magic was so strong that it justified extreme violence. You've witnessed the terrifying climax of the witch hunts, the brutal end for countless accused. Now, as the embers of the pyres slowly cool and the gallows stand silent against the dawn, we begin to explore the slow, painful decline of these brutal beliefs. It wasn't a sudden awakening, but a gradual, halting retreat, like the tide slowly pulling back from the shore, leaving behind a changed landscape. This is the story of how reason, skepticism, and changing societal norms began to chip away at the foundations of fear, eventually leading to a world where the witch, as a diabolical enemy, slowly faded from the public consciousness, though never entirely disappearing. The methods of punishment varied, but they were almost always public and severe. Burning, beheading, or being thrown to wild beasts were not uncommon fates for those accused of serious magical offenses. The goal was not rehabilitation, but eradication. The accused was seen as a source of corruption, a danger that needed to be purged from the community. There was little room for mercy or doubt when the perceived threat was so profound. Imagine the sheer exhaustion that must have settled over communities after decades, sometimes centuries, of relentless witch hunts. The economic cost was immense, the social fabric often shredded, and the sheer human toll staggering. Entire villages were decimated, families torn apart, and a pervasive sense of distrust lingered in the air. People were tired of the accusations, tired of the fear, and increasingly, tired of the seemingly endless cycle of confession and execution. The very intensity of the hunts, paradoxically, began to sow the seeds of their own demise. When accusations became too widespread, implicating respected members of society or even entire families, the absurdity of the situation became harder to ignore, even in the later Roman Empire. As Christianity became the dominant religion, the fear of magic, now explicitly linked to demonic forces, continued unabated. Edicts were issued against divination, astrology, and all forms of superstition that deviated from Christian doctrine. The Roman state, once tolerant of diverse religious practices, became increasingly intolerant, driven by a new religious fervor that saw magic as an existential threat. The intellectual landscape of Europe was also undergoing a profound transformation. The Enlightenment, a powerful movement emphasizing reason, individualism, and scientific inquiry, began to challenge traditional authority and superstitious beliefs. Philosophers like John Locke and Voltaire championed empirical observation and logical deduction over dogma and blind faith. This new way of thinking slowly but surely eroded the intellectual underpinnings of demonology. If you could explain natural phenomena through scientific principles, why attribute them to the devil or his human agents? You see the shift in emphasis? Earlier, the concern might have been about a curse causing physical harm or financial ruin. Now, the concern is also about the spiritual harm, the corruption of the soul, the allegiance to the devil. This added a new layer of terror to the accusation of witchcraft, making it not just a crime, but a sin of the highest order. It's like going from getting a speeding ticket to being accused of treason. The consequences are fundamentally different. A common historical fact that illustrates this shift is the rise of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution played a crucial role in the decline of witch hunts by promoting rational thought, empirical observation, and a skepticism towards supernatural explanations for natural events. As understanding of medicine, weather patterns, and psychology advanced, the need to blame witches for illness, storms, or mental afflictions diminished. It's like when you finally figure out why your Wi-Fi keeps cutting out. Turns out it wasn't a ghost messing with your router, but just a loose cable. Much less dramatic, but much more solvable. The brutality of these beliefs in Greece and Rome lay in their formalization. Magic was not just a shadowy, ill-defined force. It was something that could be defined, legislated against, and punished with the full might of the state. The Defixiones were not just expressions of anger. They were tangible evidence of a belief in active, malevolent magic that could be wielded by individuals. And the legal responses, from the 12 Tables to the later imperial edicts, demonstrated a society that took this threat very seriously, to the point of executing those believed to be practitioners. Legal reforms also played a significant part. The very procedural manuals that had fueled the hunts, like the Malleus Maleficarum, began to face scrutiny. Jurists and legal scholars started to question the reliability of confessions obtained under torture. They demanded higher standards of evidence, moving away from spectral testimony and hearsay towards tangible proof. The idea of innocent until proven guilty slowly started to gain traction, a stark contrast to the previous assumption of guilt for the accused witch. You recall the chilling logic of the Malleus, where denial itself was proof of guilt. Now imagine a judge, perhaps a bit weary, a bit more skeptical, demanding actual, concrete evidence. It's a small shift, but a monumental one. You feel the cold, hard logic of a world that believed in unseen forces so profoundly that it built legal frameworks and executed citizens based on those beliefs. The echoes of these ancient Roman curses and Greek hexes reverberate through history, laying the groundwork for even more brutal chapters to come. The fear, once a whisper, has now found its voice in law, and its hand in execution. Consider the growing skepticism among some medical professionals. As doctors began to understand diseases better, they could offer natural explanations for ailments previously attributed to witchcraft. A fever was no longer a witch's curse, but a symptom of infection. A mental illness was no longer demonic possession, but a condition of the mind. This didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't universally accepted, but it chipped away at the witch's perceived power. It's like when your doctor finally tells you that your chronic fatigue isn't due to a vampire curse, but just a lack of sleep and too much caffeine. A bit of a letdown, perhaps, but at least you can actually do something about it. You've journeyed through the classical world, where curses were codified and magic legislated. Now, let's drift into the long, shadowed corridors of the early medieval period, a time often called the Dark Ages, though perhaps Dim Ages is more fitting. Here, how the centralized power of Rome has crumbled, leaving behind a patchwork of small kingdoms, warring lords, and isolated communities. In this fragmented, uncertain world, where life is often short, brutal, and filled with hardship, the seeds of fear you've witnessed before will begin to blossom into a chilling, pervasive paranoia, giving rise to the first whispers of what would become organized witch hunts. A unique, little-known detail that points to the persistence of these beliefs, even as they declined, is, despite the official cessation of witch trials in most of Europe by the late 18th century, some anti-witchcraft laws remained on the books in various countries well into the 19th and even 20th centuries. And folk beliefs in harmful magic continued to exist, sometimes leading to informal violence or accusations. You might hear whispers in a remote village about a cunning woman who can still break spells, or a hex placed on arrival, long after the last official witch was executed. The legal framework might have changed, but the deep-seated fear didn't vanish with a flick of a judge's pen. It's like when you finally get rid of that annoying pop-up ad, but you still instinctively brace yourself for it every time you visit that website. Old habits die hard. Imagine yourself in a small, isolated village nestled deep within a vast, ancient forest. The Roman roads are overgrown, the grand aqueducts lie in ruins, and the knowledge of the classical world feels like a distant, fading dream. Your world is local, defined by the boundaries of your village, the rhythm of the seasons, and the ever-present threat of famine, disease, or marauding raiders. Superstition, far from being eradicated by the spread of Christianity, has merely adapted, intertwining with the new faith in complex ways. The old pagan beliefs, though officially condemned, still linger in the shadows, like stubborn weeds in a newly tilled field. The academic debate phrase that captures this complex transition is, historians continue to debate whether the decline of the witch hunts was primarily driven by intellectual shifts like the Enlightenment, legal reforms, changing religious attitudes, or a combination of socio-economic factors that reduced the need for scapegoats. Was it a triumph of reason, or simply a societal exhaustion? A realization that the cost of the hunts outweighed any perceived benefits? The answer is likely a messy, intertwined tapestry of all these elements. In this era of instability, every misfortune, every unexplained event takes on heightened significance. If the crops fail for 3 years running, it's not just bad weather. It's a sign of divine displeasure, or worse, malevolent intervention. If a mysterious illness sweeps through your family, leaving loved ones gasping for breath, it's not just a sickness, it's a curse, an evil spell. The need for an explanation, for a scapegoat, becomes almost unbearable. And in a society where knowledge is limited and fear is rampant, the easiest explanation often points to the unseen, to the dark arts, and to those perceived to wield them. The religious landscape also played a role. While the Reformation and Counter-Reformation initially intensified the hunts by fueling religious fervor and a heightened sense of cosmic battle between good and evil, the very exhaustion from these religious wars eventually led to a desire for greater stability and less internal strife. The focus gradually shifted from rooting out internal heresy to establishing national religious identities. The devil, while still very real in theological terms, became less of a direct, everyday threat mediated by human witches, and more of a grand, abstract adversary, the Christian Church. Now the dominant moral and spiritual authority plays a pivotal role in shaping these fears. While early church doctrine often viewed magic as mere illusion or demonic deception rather than genuine power wielded by humans, the popular imagination, fueled by fear and hardship, often saw it differently. The concept of a demonic pact, which you encountered briefly before, begins to solidify. It's no longer just about a person using magic. It's about a person consorting with demons, actively rejecting God, and aligning with Satan. This theological framework provides a terrifyingly clear lens through which to view misfortune. It's the work of the devil, acting through human agents. You see the shift in public discourse, pamphlets, and broadsides, once filled with terrifying accounts of witch trials, now increasingly feature satirical critiques of superstition or rational explanations for seemingly supernatural events. The printing press, which once spread the malleus, now disseminated ideas of skepticism and reason. It's a slow battle of ideas, fought not with fire and gallows, but with words and logic. A common historical fact from this period is, during the early medieval period, while large-scale witch hunts were not yet prevalent, ecclesiastical councils and penitentials' manuals for confessors began to increasingly condemn various magical practices as sinful and often demonic, laying the theological groundwork for later persecution. You might hear a local priest, his voice echoing in the small, drafty church, railing against those who consult diviners, wear charms, or perform rituals to influence love or fortune. He warns of eternal damnation, of the devil's snare, and of the insidious ways evil can creep into a community. This constant reinforcement of magic as a tool of evil gradually hardens communal attitudes. Economic and social stability also contributed to the decline. When harvests were good, and communities were less ravaged by plague or war, the desperate need for a scapegoat diminished. People were less likely to attribute their misfortunes to unseen forces when tangible, natural explanations were readily available, or when life simply wasn't as relentlessly brutal. When you're not constantly worried about where your next meal is coming from, you have less energy to worry about whether your neighbor is secretly casting spells. You remember the old woman, Agnes, who lives by the stream. She knows every herb, every folk remedy. When your child had the coughing sickness last winter, her brew of elderflower and honey brought relief. But now, the new priest preaches about devil's herbs and unholy concoctions. Agnes still helps, but you notice the villagers eye her with a new caution, a flicker of suspicion. Her knowledge, once a comfort, now feels like a dangerous secret. It's like when your favorite comfort food suddenly gets labeled as unhealthy by the latest diet craze. You still love it, but you eat it with a side of guilt and a dash of paranoia. However, it's crucial to remember that the decline of the witch hunts did not mean the end of prejudice or the human tendency to blame. The brutal beliefs simply found new targets, new forms, the fear of the other, the need for a scapegoat, the tendency to attribute misfortune to malevolent forces. These are deeply ingrained human traits. The witch might have faded, but the underlying anxieties remained, ready to attach themselves to new groups, new conspiracy theories, new forms of evil. It's like when you finally get rid of that one annoying bug in your house, only to realize there's a whole different kind of bug lurking in the basement. Always something, isn't there? The early accusations of witchcraft often emerged from personal disputes, neighborhood squabbles, or unexplained misfortunes. If your cow suddenly stopped giving milk, and you'd recently had a heated argument with your neighbor, it was easy to suspect they had bewitched your animal. These weren't yet grand inquisitions, but localized outbreaks of fear and accusation, often handled by village elders or local lords. The methods of determining guilt were rudimentary and often cruel. You reflect on the echoes of these brutal beliefs in the modern age. We no longer burn people at the stake for witchcraft, thankfully. But do we still see instances of mass hysteria, where fear and misinformation spread like wildfire, turning neighbor against neighbor? Do we still demonize groups of people, attributing complex societal problems to their malevolent actions? Do we still cling to irrational beliefs, even in the face of overwhelming evidence? When those beliefs offer a comforting, albeit false, explanation for a chaotic world? The answer, unfortunately, is often yes. The witch hunts might be a dark chapter in history, but the human tendencies that fueled them are still very much with us, just wearing different disguises. Consider the ordeal a common method of proof in this era. You might be accused of witchcraft, and to prove your innocence, you are subjected to the ordeal by cold water. Your hands and feet are bound, and you are thrown into a consecrated body of water. If you sink, you are innocent, for the pure water accepts you. If you float, however, you are guilty, for the water has rejected you as impure, in league with evil. The logic is chillingly simple, and the outcome, often fatal, leaves little room for justice. It's like a medieval swimming test, where failing means you're innocent, and passing means you're doomed. What a system. You can almost hear the faint whispers of those ancient fears, now distant echoes in the vast expanse of time. The brutal beliefs behind ancient witchcraft, though largely relegated to history books, serve as a potent reminder of the fragility of reason, the insidious power of fear, and the enduring human capacity for both immense cruelty and, eventually, a slow, hard-won wisdom. A unique, little-known detail from this period is early medieval legal codes, such as the Salic law from the Franks, contained provisions against maleficium harmful magic, but often treated it as a property crime or a form of poisoning, rather than a distinct religious heresy. This indicates that while the fear of magic was present, the full-blown concept of a witch as a devil-worshipping heretic was still developing. The focus was more on the tangible harm caused than on the spiritual allegiance. You can imagine a local lord, more concerned with his lost livestock than with the state of anyone's soul, demanding justice for a bewitched cow.